All right, good evening everyone. Good to see you again. We've got a full house here in Howick, and those who are online or watching this later benefits from our look at Chronicles, a very obscure part of the Bible, but I'm hoping that you will find it very encouraging. I call it the post-exilic hope, and that's really what it is. So let me pray as we get going, and then we'll dive straight in. Father, thank you for another chance to be together. We thank you for the word that you have had written for us and preserved for us and translated for us. We thank you for your Spirit who interprets it and for us and applies it to our hearts. We pray for your help again tonight in seeing the relevance of what was written so very long ago, that it might draw us close to you and keep our eyes fixed on eternity. In Jesus' name, amen. 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 Right, so 1 and 2 Chronicles has traditionally fallen on very hard times, and it's not surprising when you have a quick scan through the book. There are lots of long, full genealogies commenting on these two verses, which are probably that are familiar to people from 1 and 2 Chronicles, and how the rest of the book books are completely ignored, and Christians really struggle to see the relevance because most of it is already covered in Samuel and Kings. It's just a rerun of the history of ancient Israel. And so why is it all repeated for us in 1 and 2 Chronicles? And by the way, 1 and 2 Chronicles are the last book in the Hebrew Bible. They've got the same books as we've got, the Jews, in their Bible, but they've rearranged them in a different way. And 1 and 2 Chronicles closes their Bible. Their Bible closes with 1 and 2 Chronicles. And I hope that we will see why by the time we get to the end of this. So there's some obvious questions that we need to answer if we're going to try and work out why 1 and 2 Chronicles is in the Bible at all. Firstly, why is so much of Israel's history repeated? Especially the whole story of David and Solomon and all the kings after them. So already all those kings are listed for us in Samuel and the book of Kings. So why are they all listed again? Secondly, what is it that Chronicles offers us? What would we be losing if it wasn't in the Bible? That's always a really important question to ask. If the book of Acts is not in the Bible, imagine for a minute the book of Acts is on the Bible. What have you lost? You know, the book closes with Jesus rising again, ascending, and then the next book would be the letters written to churches that have been established all over the around the Mediterranean. How did that happen? Well, the book of Acts fills in the gap for us. So what gap does 1 and 2 Chronicles fill in for us? It looks like there's no gap at all. So we're going to try and answer those exact questions by thinking about, as always, the same old two things: context and then content. Okay, what is the context of 1 and 2 Chronicles? In other words, what sort of questions, by now you should be telling me this, what sort of questions give us the context?
Who was it written to?
Exactly. Who was it written to? Who were the original readers of 1 and 2 Chronicles, and who wrote it? And when was it written? And what was the circumstance surrounding the Jews, especially the Jews, when it was written? And once you do that, it's very simple questions, but questions that people forget to ask all the time. Ask those questions, and it's actually difficult to get the Bible wrong. Who was it written to, and who wrote it, and why? It's as simple as that. So, authorship, who wrote it, and the dating of Chronicles. Maybe just for a little bit of fun, before we move off the prayer of Jabez. So 2 Chronicles 7:14 is about you. Tell me again about your time in the Babylonian exile. Okay. So, was it written to us? Well, it was written to us, but is it about us? No, it's not. Because we were not in the Babylonian exile. Okay. So it's written to us, and it's got a message to tell us that it wasn't written about us. It's not a promise for us. Okay. And we didn't experience the Babylonian exile. Just to I'll keep that up, and we'll get to that as we go through this. For a long time, many people thought Ezra was the author of 1 and 2 Chronicles because he's, when you read the book of Ezra, he's a very learned fellow, a scholar. He was very literate, and he lived around the time that 1 and 2 Chronicles was written. But actually, we don't know. It's a bit like the book of Hebrews, best not to say. It's simply the writer of the letter to the Hebrews, and the chronicler. Whoever wrote the books of Chronicles, the chronicler. And that's, I think, what most scholars agree today, that it wasn't Ezra necessarily. That was just another person. From what we read in the book of Chronicles, the evidence inside the book of Chronicles, it's clear that the chronicler, the author, had access to lots of other writings and sources as he puts his book together. He covers a massive period of history, right from the very beginning all the way through to his present time. We can't be sure that he had access to 1 and 2 Kings, which is where the big overlap is. The big overlap is between 1 and 2 Kings and 1 and 2 Chronicles. We're not sure if he had access to it. I suspect he did, but there's no direct quotes from 1 and 2 Kings or anything like that. But we do know that he has had Isaiah's prophecy on his desk next to him while he was writing. He quotes Isaiah in 2 Chronicles, well, he refers to Isaiah at the end of his book, 2 Chronicles 26:22. In the first year of Cyrus, and we know these names by now, don't we? Cyrus, king of Persia, the guy who let the people return from exile. In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah, so he knows about Jeremiah, does the chronicler, the Lord moved the heart of Cyrus, king of Persia, to make a proclamation throughout his realm and also to put it in writing. So in order to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah, in other words, he knew what God had said in Jeremiah, and he says, in order that that be fulfilled, God moved the heart of this pagan king, Cyrus, to write a decree allowing the Jews to go home. As for the content, the chronicler goes back as far as he can. Chapter 1, verse 1, he goes right, literally, back to the beginning. Adam, Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and Noah, the sons of Noah, and so he goes on. He starts with Adam, okay, right back to the very, very beginning. And he goes as far as he can, which is that verse that I just read for you, the fact that Cyrus released the people throughout the realm and put it into writing. So we can see from just those verses then why Chronicles is placed where it is in the history books, in the collection of the history books. 1 and 2 Kings goes straight into 1 and 2 Chronicles. Ezra, chapter 1, verse 1 begins, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah be fulfilled. The Lord stirred the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout his kingdom and put it into writing. So Ezra starts with the same verse that Chronicles ends with. So Ezra obviously had the book of Chronicles open on his desk when he was writing his book, and he says, I'm going to just pick up the story from 1 and 2 Chronicles, and he quotes the last verse as he begins the first verse of his book. So Chronicles covers the whole length of the whole Old Testament period, right up to the end of the exile. And that's why it's called Chronicles. Okay, Chronicles, the word just means a record, a chronicle, the Chronicles of Narnia. Okay, the story of the history of Narnia, the story of the history of Israel is really what Chronicles is all about. But if you read carefully, at the end of 1 Chronicles, at the end of 1 Chronicles chapter 3, numerous generations are listed in these long genealogies. And from verse 16 of chapter 3, we find, well, verse 16 says the successors of Jehoiakim, his son, and Zedekiah. Now again, those names should at least be ringing a bell, even though if you don't know where you heard them, you heard them. Jehoiakim and Jehoiachin and Zedekiah. They were the last kings of Israel. of the southern kingdom, of Judah. That's right, of Judah. They were the ones, when Nebuchadnezzar arrived, they were the ones on the throne. They were Zedekiah was governor. Remember Zedekiah, the signet ring, and all of that. The ring is going to be taken with Zedekiah's finger and placed on a new Zedekiah, who is Jesus, much later on. And then he goes on, verse 17, the descendants of Jehoiachin, the captive. So Jehoiachin was the king who was taken off to Babylon. And he sat, remember, at the king's table in Babylon and ate with the king, which was the great hope that actually all is not lost. And here are the descendants of Jehoiachin. Shealtiel, there's Malkiram, there's etc., etc. And then there's the sons of those people, and they are listed. And then there are their sons, and their sons, and their sons. And then, actually, their sons. 24, up to the end of verse 24. So what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 generations after the exile are listed for us, which is much more than just the 70 years of the exile. And so he's actually going right forward in time, after the return, and then some. And so Chronicles is very, very recent. That's why it's at the end of the Jewish canon, because it runs 7 generations after the exile. So what we read, when we're reading the book of 1 and 2 Chronicles, we are reading the very, very last part of Old Testament history. We have nothing more recent than 1 and 2 Chronicles when it comes to the Old Testament.
But what about, you said Ezra follows us?
Yes, yes. So Ezra picks up part of the story of Chronicles, and documents a short period, but Chronicles actually spans longer. Yeah, around Ezra. Ezra kind of focuses in on just the temple bit, and Chronicles then gives us generations that live after that.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so although Ezra seems to follow Chronicles, you could say Chronicles follows Ezra and Nehemiah. Well, it certainly continues the story after them. And of course, if it continues the story after them, the author, going to follow this carefully, must have lived after them, for him to know the names of the generations that came 7 generations later. He must have been part of that last generation. So he would have been a fairly recent Jew, relatively speaking, living, I don't know, 400 BC, way after the exile, and writing backwards from that point up to Adam. Now, that's the context. That's the context. If he's living way after the exile, in fact, way after Ezra and Nehemiah, after the temple's been built, who's he writing for? People of his day. He's not writing for dead people. The exiles, the people who went into exiles, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, they did. He's not writing for the people who returned, the first returnees, they're probably dead. He's writing for his generation, obviously, and follow us. But from his generation onwards. So who were his generation, or rather, what were they up against? They were back in the promised land.
They hadn't heard from the Lord.
There's dead silence from the Lord for 400 years. No prophets, no miracles, no signs, no wonders, no nothing. Absolute silence from heaven. And actually, they've been pelted from every side. You know, the Greeks are about to overrun them, followed by the Romans, who came later, the Roman Empire. It really is a miserable existence. And he's writing to that generation. And what sort of message do you think he wants to give them? Hope. Post-exilic hope. So it's a book that's very, very optimistic when you read it. Full of hope. Bright future, guys. It's, any time now, it's going to be fun. Just hang in there. I know it's a miserable existence and you want to just rather die. But don't worry, God hasn't forgotten his promises. So it's a bright book. It's a very upbeat book to read, compared to 1 and 2 Samuel and 1 and 2 Kings. And so there's part of the difference. And there's part of the reason we've got 1 and 2 Chronicles, but we'll get to that just now. So let's think about the message of Chronicles. It's legitimate to compare it to the other history books, 1 and 2 Kings, 1 and 2 Samuel, like we might compare the Gospels to each other. But just like when we compare the Gospels to each other, we must always let each Gospel tell us its own message. We don't mash them into one, okay? We will read or we will teach Luke, and then we will read or we will teach Matthew. Even though they're covering the same ground, we must let them tell their message on their own terms. And so we've already got 1 and 2 Samuel, we've already got 1 and 2 Kings, but we must let Chronicles speak on its own terms. And let's not mash it together with the other 2 books. It's got a very, very unique message to give to a very unique audience. Obviously, its message is going to be unique. So let's look at the text itself. So this is the run of the generations, just so that we have it in the back of our heads as we go through this. So he goes right back, actually before this, he goes back to Adam. And of course, after Adam, we get to the next big characters is Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then through Jacob's 4 wives, we get the 12 tribes of Israel. These 2, the tribes of Manasseh and Ephraim, they're not sons of Jacob, they're grandsons of Jacob, they're sons of Joseph. So that's always a little bit confusing. So one of the tribes of Israel is not Joseph. You would think it would have been, but then there would only be 11. The 12 tribes, because actually he's not counted as the leader of a tribe, his sons are, which is a bit of an idiosyncrasy. But they're the 12 tribes of Israel. And so we find these 2 lines get picked up very strongly in Chronicles. The line of Levi, which gives us all the Levites and the priests and the high priests. Moses and Aaron come from that, so Aaron's the first high priest of Israel. And then from Judah come the kings of Israel. Remember, Judah will give rise to the kings. The scepter will never depart from his hand, I think was the prophecy over Judah. In other words, he is going to give rise to people who walk around with scepters. Who walks around with a scepter? A king or a queen, a monarch. And so King David, King Solomon, kings of Judah, all the way down to King Jesus. Now it's interesting that King Saul, when he is chosen by the people, they want a king, and Saul is a very impressive character. Notice he does not come from the right tribe. He comes from the tribe of Benjamin. We saw that, remember, with Esther. And when he failed to sort out King Agag, another person from the tribe of Benjamin came and did sort out King Agag. But he actually should never have been made king of Israel. He's from the wrong tribe. It went against everything that God had said. And of course it was a total disaster. Whereas the legitimate king of Israel, real king of Israel, Jesus, he comes from the perfect tribe. He comes from the right line. I think both Mary and Joseph come from the line of Judah, if I'm not mistaken. Certainly Joseph was. So that just gives you a bit of a roadmap of where this is all going. What we're really doing is tracing this line to get down to God's Messiah, God's promised anointed king. And we can see that actually God preserves this line through thick and thin against all sorts of threats, human threats, even against ecological threats and natural disasters. God preserves this line. There are women who can't have babies, and God gives them babies to preserve this line. He is hell-bent on making sure Jesus gets there. And he moves heaven and earth to make sure Jesus does get there.
And in the southern kingdom, which tribes was made up of? Benjamin.
Yeah, 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin.
Judah.
So Judah, the Jews come from Judah.
Yeah.
As the Benjamites come from Benjamin, Jews come from Judah. And those 2 end up in the southern tribe of Judah. The rest all head up north.
Okay.
Yeah. I think, if I'm not mistaken, half of this tribe emigrated south. When they saw the writing on the wall, they saw how apostate the northern kingdom was becoming. I think they were preserved, and they moved down south from their allotted land, which was up in the north. They gave up their land, and moved in with these guys to just preserve their faith in God. So that line was preserved. The others were lost, the lost tribes of Israel, gone, annihilated, and scattered, never to be found again, to this day.
Well, Levi must have been preserved because that's where the priests came from.
That's right. Yeah, so all those priests
Yeah.
in Jesus' day, yeah. And Jesus himself, is not only a king, but a great high priest as well.
Simeon.
Yeah, he was a priest, hey?
Jesus when he was a baby.
He uttered those famous words, hey, now I can die.
Prophesied,
Yeah.
over him at a week old.
Yeah. It's a very interesting, because two people in Luke do that. Is it Elizabeth?
Yes.
Certainly Simeon is the other one who says they were waiting faithfully for the consummation of Israel. They were waiting for this Messiah. They knew. And when he sees Jesus, he says, now I can die.
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to break up these books into some sections. The first is chapters 1 through to 9 of Chronicles. Not exactly scintillating reading, if you've ever tried. Okay? It's just made up of these massive genealogies with names that no one can pronounce. They're just, okay, good luck if you ever asked to read from that publicly. But they are very, very important. And if you try and step back from the, from the detail and see what is the message actually of these first 9 chapters, you'll see that they're common themes. It's all about kings and the temple and the fate of the southern kingdom. Those 3 come through again and again and again. The kings that God has provided, the temple and all the worship that goes around the temple, and it's all about the southern kingdom. And then, of course, all of that is clouded by hundreds, and you said thousands, it might be thousands of names. This, he had these sons. Those sons had these sons. Those sons had these sons. And so it goes on and on and on. Now, if we break that up a little bit smaller, looking at 1 Chronicles chapters 1 through to 3, we see that he chronicles the story from Adam all the way down to the time that he is busy writing. Mentioning, as you saw a little while ago, those in chapter 3, verse 17 onwards, who lived after the end of the exile. So these 3 chapters are the whole family tree of the whole Old Testament, all in one shot, from Adam right down to his present day. Now, if you read very carefully, some branches of this family are developed, and some aren't. Some he just mentions and then moves on. Others he goes into huge amounts of detail. And when you see that happening, you need to pay attention. You need to get out a pen and pencil and start writing down names and see what line is he they're focusing on, and then you can ask why. For example, the family trees of Noah's sons, Japheth and Ham, are not developed at all. Japheth and Ham are just mentioned in passing, and it's like that on various occasions. Because actually what he's doing is this. He's tracing the royal line. He wants to trace the royal line. So he'll give a nod to the other lines, but actually he's not interested in the other lines for now. He's interested in the royal line that's going to lead to the king, the ultimate king of Israel. And so by the end of chapter 3, he wants us to see that there's a continuous line, an unbroken line, from Adam to Noah to Abram to Judah to David, and through David's line to his day. What he's saying is that that line is alive and well as I sit here writing this book. That line is still going strong. So it leaves us the question, why is he so concerned? Remember, at the end of the exile, they returned, they're back in the land, they've got their temple and everything. Why is he still trying to tell us that his line is unbroken? We have to have a look and see why just now. In chapters 4 through to 7, he wants to, we'll leave it there. He wants to tell us about all the descendants of the 12 sons of Jacob. So chapters 4 through to 7 focus now on David and his descendants, the 12 tribes of Israel. Chapter 4, he goes back to a genealogy that he's already covered in chapters 1 to 3. Okay, and he digs it up again. That is the line of Judah, Levi, and Benjamin. He's already covered that. But now he says, let's go back and look again and expand on that a little bit. He wants to highlight something. He repeats the Benjamin line in chapter 8, and he's already mentioned it in chapter 7. He goes back to this line of Benjamin again. You've got to ask why. And the answer lies in chapter 8 when we discover actually Benjamin, it seems to be completely out of kilter with where he's going. He's going down the royal line through this long genealogy. So why jump across to Benjamin? It's because of this. It's because of that. He wants to highlight to you that this guy is not from the right line. And so he jumps back to Benjamin and says, look what happened when people chose a king that was not from the right line. It was a disaster. Okay? They thought that they would have it their way. So Benjamin produces the first king of United States of Israel. Okay? Before the split, the Saul becomes king. And so begins the first royal line for the United States of Israel. Judah, of course, produces the line of David, which is the second royal line. And so we have these two royal lines running. Those descendants of King Saul must have been aggrieved that actually they missed out on the throne. Because now the crown gets passed not to a son of Saul, it gets passed across a whole lot of lines down to this guy, to King David. It's a bit like Queen Elizabeth handing over her throne, not to Charles, but to some obscure great-great-nephew 4 times removed, and gives him the throne. It's a radical change and unprecedented in ancient Near Eastern history. The son succeeded the father as king, like it still does today in many places. Chapter 9 shows us that he's also very interested in the temple. So remember I said he's interested in the southern kingdom, he's interested in the temple, in the kingly line, the royal line, and he's interested in the temple. So in chapter 9 verses 1 and 2, and remember this temple is the temple after the exile, not the temple before Solomon built. This is the one that got rebuilt, Ezra and Nehemiah's day.
This is when they were weeping.
Yeah. And the old men were weeping, and the young men were so excited because they got this temple. And the old people saying, this is not a temple. This is not a temple. I don't know what you guys are getting so excited about. And so he starts tracing the line of those who work in the temple. Chapter 9, verse 1. All of Israel was listed in the genealogies in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah. They were taken captive to Babylon because of their unfaithfulness. Now, the first to resettle on their own property in their own towns were some Israelites, priests, Levites, and temple servants. Those from Judah, from Benjamin, and from Ephraim and Manasseh who lived in Jerusalem were, and he starts listing names. He goes down, goes down, goes down. We get down to verse 10, of the priests, and he starts listing all the way down. Verse 14, of the Levites, he starts listing Levites' names. And then the gatekeepers, they all get listed all the way down from verse 17. And then he jumps down to verse 33. He starts talking about the genealogy of King Saul. Jehiel, the father of Gibeon, lived in Gibeon. His wife's name was Maacah. Firstborn was Abdon, etc., 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 all the way down, tracing this line of King Saul, showing that it's a different line. It's a different line to David's line, the line of Judah. So you can see all of these genealogies that he's listing are post-exilic genealogies, people who lived after the return to Israel and who served in the temple. So, 3 things stand out from this section of chapters 1 to 9. The royal line, and both of them he mentions, these 2 royal lines, the fact that one was illegitimate, and the southern tribes of Judah and Benjamin, and then the temple line, the line of the Levites, and he lists those who have anything to do with the temple. So ask this question, and we'll answer it later. Why is this focus on kings and the temple and the southern kingdom? Why is all his effort going there? If he's really just being an unbiased, objective historian, writing the story of Israel from Adam down to his own day, well, he's not doing a pretty good job, because he's extremely biased. He gives almost no attention to 10 tribes, 9.5 tribes, He gives almost all his attention to 2.5 tribes, and specifically to one tribe. That's not unbiased, and that's not objective. He's got a purpose. He's got a goal that he's trying to achieve by writing this, which we'll get to. Well, the next chunk is chapter 10, really to the end. Chapter 10 to the end of 1 Chronicles focuses on David. Very, very dominated by David. There's a very, very brief mention of King Saul in 1 Chronicles 10, but then the rest of the book is all about one person, David. So everything up to this point has been laying the ground, doing the groundwork for David, to present us David's story. He's presented all the background from Adam to get us down to David. He said, there's a slight deviation, Benjamin, Saul, but let's get back to David. Very concerned with David. And this is all summarized in chapter 10, verses 13 to 14. Saul died for his breach of faith. He broke faith with the Lord, in that he did not keep the command of the Lord, and also consulted a medium, seeking guidance. He did not seek guidance from the Lord. Therefore, the Lord put him to death and turned the kingdom over to David, the son of Jesse. That's it. That is all we're told of King Saul. It's amazing. So, end of chapter 9, the last few verses is giving us a brief genealogy, a little run-up to who King Saul was, a little bit of his background, and then King Saul is presented, and then God kills him. And that's it. There's nothing spoken to us about Saul's rise to power. There's nothing told to us about his great victories in the early part of his reign that you can read about in Kings and Samuel. In 1 Samuel, Samuel dedicated chapter 9 through to 31. How many chapters is that, James? 22 chapters, I think. 9 to 31. 22 chapters Samuel gives to King Saul. This guy gives him 2 verses. There's something obviously going on here. Here, the only focus is on his death and why he died. He died because he broke faith with the Lord. He did not consult the Lord. He consulted a medium. And so God killed him. And then we're told, and then David took over. Now, let's get started, says the chronicler. That's where I want to get going. And then he spends the rest of his book on this guy, David. So it's very, very biased in favor of King David. So as we look at this, chapters 11 through to 16 tells us about this new king who arrives after King Saul, King David. His rise to power is given to us in verses 1 through to 3 of chapter 11. Then from verses 4 to 9, we're told all about how he conquered Jerusalem. Verse 10 through to the end of chapter 12 tells us about his military might and what a powerful military ruler he was, and a huge focus on his very, very substantial, very, very powerful army that he commanded. And so, in fact, all the warriors and their whole genealogies are given to us. He's very concerned about David and David's army and the might of David. He wants us to appreciate just what an incredibly powerful man this David was. Well, he doesn't want us to appreciate. He wants his readers, wherever they are, to appreciate, the post-exilic readers to appreciate just how incredibly powerful David was. Chapters 13 through to 15 tells us about the ark being brought back to Jerusalem. Do you remember the ark was captured during one of the battles? King Saul lost the ark. It got captured by the Philistines, and it started producing sores all over them. Do you remember that? And now it comes back, and that's told for us from chapters 13 through to 15. It tells us how David conquered Jerusalem and made Jerusalem the capital of Judah. Chapter 14, stuck in between of 13 and 15, tells us about David's family line and how he defeated all the Philistines as a result of the ark being brought to Jerusalem. Chapter 16, we're given David's brilliant song of praise as he sings God's praises in thanksgiving for the Philistine defeat, for managing to capture the ark and bring it back. And so there's this amazing Starts out, give praise to the Lord and proclaim his name, make known among the nations what he has done. I mean, just think about that in the New Testament context. Okay? As a Christian, you could say that. Give praise to the Lord, proclaim his name, make known among the nations what he has done. But we wouldn't be talking about the defeat of the Philistines, would we? We'd be talking about the cross.
Yeah.
And the fact that he's defeated death and risen again and ascended and is ruling and reigning. And we should make known his name to the nations. It's amazing, isn't it? How we can start seeing this going the way of the gospel.
Yeah.
And the fact that God's ultimate victory is going to result in the same sort of pressure from us. Sing to him, sing praise to him, tell of all his wonderful acts. Glory in his holy name. Let the hearts of those who seek the Lord rejoice. Look to the Lord and his strength. Seek his face always. I mean, it's just wonderful, wonderful song that David composes in thanksgiving and praise for the victory God gives. But notice that when we compare this to 2 Samuel, it's worth noticing the difference between the account of these stories. So how does the chronicler tell us the story versus how does Samuel tell us the story? And it's interesting. In 1 Chronicles 16, we're told about David's coming to power, and the equivalent is 2 Samuel chapter 6. Here, there's no mention of David's anointing. There's no mention of Goliath. The David-Goliath story is not, you won't find in 1 Chronicles. I mean, imagine telling the story of David and not telling the story of Goliath. I mean, his most amazing victory is not here. He just leaves it out. And when something like that happens, you've got to ask, well, why? It is a hugely significant event in Israel's history. David literally saves Israel from annihilation. And the chronicler isn't interested in telling us that. Like, why on earth would he leave out the story of David and Goliath? Nothing is ever told to us about the bad blood between King Saul and King David. The fact that for years, King Saul was after David's blood. He tried many times to kill David, and not a hint of it. Not a hint of it in these pages. Why? Well, we'll have to answer that question. When we get to the next chapter, however, we find that 1 Chronicles 17 is almost word for word the same as 2 Samuel chapter 7, the next chapter in 2 Samuel. So whereas 1 Chronicles 16 is completely different to 2 Samuel 6, when you turn over the page and look at the next 2 chapters, they are word for word. What is he doing? Why is he doing this? Yeah, Penny looks very puzzled, and rightly so. Rightly so.
2 Samuel 17 is that?
2 Samuel 7.
7.
Remember, it's a very famous chapter that should be ringing bells, because that's the great covenant God makes with David. That one from your line will sit on your throne and rule forever. An eternal king is going to come from David and will rule over God's kingdom forever and ever and ever. So 2 Samuel 7 is all about this great covenant, a great promise that God commits himself to, that he will give a king to Israel that will never die, and who will establish the promises that he had made all the way back in Abraham's day. Well, as we keep going, chapter 18 through to 20, we're told all about David's victories. He's a warrior king, clearly a warrior king, a victorious king, a king who keeps on defeating God's enemies and the enemies of God's people. He's clearly the one that God is going to use to rescue his people. Then chapter 21 tells us about the census that David took. Remember that fateful census when he counted the fighting men, and he should never have done that. The same story is told to us at the end of 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel closes with the census that David took, which was very unwise and actually resulted in judgment. And there, in 2 Samuel, it's explained to us as being David's great sin, almost as bad as the sin with Bathsheba. But here we're told, very, very interestingly, chapter 21, verse 1, here's the reason that David did the census. Chapter 21, verse 1, Satan rose up against Israel and incited David to take a census of Israel. And so David said to Joab and the commanders, go and count the men. Back there, it was just David's pride. It was just David who decided to take a census, and God said, that is wrong. You're trusting in your men, and you're not trusting me. It doesn't matter how many men you've got, you know. Yeah, we're given a totally different spin on it. We're given the other side to it. Yeah, it's Satan's fault. Satan incited David to take the sentence. It's almost like the author here is trying to soften the blow. He's trying to paint David in as good a light as he possibly can. He says it's Satan's fault, a bit like Nancy Premier. Hey, the devil made me do it. The devil made him do it. It wasn't David's fault, guys. It was the devil. Okay? Interesting, isn't it? The conclusion of the matter comes in chapter 22, verse 1, where we're told that it was, very interestingly, David who decided where the temple and the altar should be constructed. Do you remember who built the temple and the altar? The great one, Solomon. And back there, all glory goes to Solomon for anything to do with the temple. Here we're being told in chapter 21, verse 1, David said, the house of the Lord God is to be here, and also the altar of burnt offering for Israel. And so David gave orders to assemble foreigners residing in Israel, and from among them he appointed stone cutters to prepare dressed stone for building the house of God. He provided a large amount of iron to make nails for the doors of the gateways and for the fittings, and more bronze than could be weighed. And it goes on and on and on and on about how much David did towards building the temple. And not a hint of that is anywhere else. Remember that question? What would we not know if we didn't have this? We would not know that David had anything to do with the temple, other than he had it in his mind to build the temple, and God said, no, you've got blood on your hands. Do you remember? Your son will build the house for me. That's all we're told in 2 Samuel 7. Remember, I want to build your house. God says, no, I want to build your house. You can't build my house, your son will build my house, but I will give you a son, and he will reign forever and ever. I'm going to build a dynasty from you, David. But as for building me a house, don't worry about that. I've got that. Solomon's going to do that for me. And if we didn't have 1 Chronicles, actually we would not know any different to that. And here we're told that actually David was intimately involved in the planning of the temple, the choice of site, getting all the materials prepared and ready, even recruiting stone cutters, etc., etc., etc.
Was that part of God's will, or was he being disobedient?
No, I think it was God's will. Yeah, for sure. He didn't actually build the temple.
Yeah, he didn't build it.
But he did everything except build the temple. Yeah, yeah. Again, remember, what is 1 Chronicles? What sort of picture is he painting of David? A great picture of David, yeah. So he's trying to paint David in as what's the word? In as good a light as possible. Amazing. Well, from there on, chapter 22, all the way through to 29, we're told about the preparation of the building of the temple that David was involved in. What's that? 8 chapters worth of what David does towards the temple being built. And you know what? Not a word of this is repeated anywhere else. You would not know all of these chapters. You would not know anything that happens in these chapters if it wasn't for 1 and 2 Chronicles. It's like 1 and 2, the chronicler has said, guys, there's so much missing from 1 and 2 Samuel. There's no credit given to David. Let me write a story that really fills in the huge gaps that there are. It's a bit like, Matthew and Luke taking Mark's gospel and say, oh my goodness, that's a good start, but there's huge gaps. Like Mark starts with Jesus' baptism. And it wasn't his christening. It was his baptism at 30 years old. What about the first 30 years, Mark? Okay, Luke says, I'll write those. And Matthew says, well, I might as well. And so they write the first 30 years in, using Mark as a skeleton, as a structure. And it's like he's doing that chase, trying to fill in the gaps. In case you get the wrong idea, the wrong impression of David, he wants you to have a very, very high view of David by the time he's finished with his work here. All we're told in 2 Samuel, the equivalent, is that he wanted to build it. That's all. That he had an idea that he would like to build the temple. That's it. And here we're told just how much effort he put in to the temple being built. He arranged for the officials and the Levites in chapter 23 to 24. He got them all trained up and ready for action. The musicians he chose in chapter 25 got them all trained up with their harps and their lyres and everything. The gatekeepers he chooses, handpicks in chapter 26. In chapter 28, we're told on that he, amazingly, listen to this, chapter 28 from verse 11 and 12. Then David gave his son Solomon the plans for the portico of the temple, its buildings, its storerooms, its upper parts, its inner rooms, and the place of atonement. He gave him the plans of all that the Spirit had put in his mind for the courts of the temple of the Lord and all the surrounding rooms, for the treasuries of the temple of God and for the treasuries of the dedicated things. He gave him, Solomon, instructions for the division of the priests and the Levites and for all the work of serving in the temple of the Lord, as well as for the article to be used in his service. He, David, designated the weight of the gold to be used for all the various articles. All the way down to verse 20. David also said to Solomon his son, "Be strong and courageous, and do the work. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord God, my God, is with you. He will not fail you or forsake you until all the work of the service of the temple of the Lord is finished. The divisions of the priests and the Levites are ready for all the work of the temple of God, and every willing person skilled in any craft will help you in all the work. The officials and all the people will obey your every command." So who drew the plans of the temple? David. David drew them. Remember what it says? That the Spirit had put in his mind. David drew the plans. David got everything ready. David handpicked the people. David got the material ready. David encouraged Solomon in case Solomon got nervous and backed out. Just David, who was driving the whole time, driving this temple building project. And you would not know that if you didn't read 1 Chronicles. No. Okay, the last few chapters tell us of the transition between David and Solomon. So how does Solomon come to power? Well, 1 Chronicles 29 gives us that. If 1 Chronicles focuses on David from chapter 10, remember the first 9 chapters are genealogies, getting them ready. If from chapter 10 to the end is all about David, well, 2 Chronicles is all about Solomon. The whole of 2 Chronicles is all about Solomon. 9 chapters are dedicated to his reign, which is slightly less than what we're given in 1 Kings. So 1 Kings gives about the same amount of time to Solomon, and the information is fairly similar between 1 Kings and 2 Chronicles. What we found is that the material is given to us in a chiasm. Now you all know what a chiasm is by now. And this pattern of bringing everything down to a point. So Solomon asks for wisdom in chapter 1. And in chapter 9, we're told that he is the wise king. Oh, thanks, Shane. So his prayer is for wisdom. And by chapter 9, we're told that he's a wise king to whom all the nations are coming for wisdom. The middle section is all about the building of the temple. So chapter 2, we found the preparations. Chapter 3, it's been built. Chapter 4, it's been furnished. The ark is brought in chapter 5, and then Solomon dedicates the temple in chapter 6 and 7. And then there's chapter 8 is wisdom. It starts out with wisdom, ends with wisdom, and that wisdom is used to build the temple, to get the job done. Now, just as in 1 Kings, 2 Chronicles also tells us how the promise that God makes, this unconditional promise to David, "I will make your son an eternal king who will reign from your throne forever." Unconditional, I will. How it becomes a deal with Solomon, how it becomes conditional when that promise is passed from David to Solomon. So Let me just get to 1 Kings here. So in 1 Kings chapter 9, I should have had this verse up on the screen. So 1 Kings chapter 9 from verse 3. The Lord said to him, I've heard the prayer and plea you have made before me. I have consecrated this temple. So this is Solomon. He's finished the temple, and God is speaking to him. With this temple you have built, by putting my name there forever. My eyes and my heart will always be there. As for you, if you walk before me faithfully, with integrity of heart and uprightness, as David your father did, and if you do all I command and observe my decrees and laws, I will establish your royal throne over Israel forever, as I promised David your father, when I said you will never fail to have a successor on the throne of Israel. But if you or your descendants turn away from me and do not observe the commands and decrees I've given you, and if you go off and serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel from the land I've given them and will reject this temple I have consecrated for my name. Israel will then become a byword and an object of ridicule among all the nations. This temple will become a heap of rubble. All who pass by will be appalled and will scoff and say, why has the Lord done such a thing to this land and to this people? And then in 2 Chronicles chapter 7 from verse 12, when Solomon, so this is the parallel, the equivalent passage to what I've just read from Kings, when Solomon had finished the temple of the Lord in the royal palace and had succeeded in carrying out all he had in mind to do in the temple of the Lord and in his own palace, the Lord appeared to him at night and said, I have heard your prayer and have chosen this place for myself as a temple for sacrifices. When I shut up the heavens so that there's no rain, or command locusts to devour the land, or to send a plague among my people, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, and I will forgive their sin and heal their land. So that's the equivalent passage that is recorded for us. And can you see how what was unconditional to David becomes conditional? If you are faithful, if you turn to me, if you humble yourself and pray and seek my face and turn from your wicked, then I will put a king on the throne for you who will rule you. So you end up with this problem, don't you? How is God going to keep a promise that he made to David if he threatens not to keep it because of disobedience from the people when it comes to Solomon? It's the same promise. And of course, we know what the answer is, don't we? That actually what we need is a representative to come and represent the people. And a representative who will humble himself and pray and seek his face and turn from the wicked ways. Well, then God will hear from heaven and heal the land. And will carry out the promise that he gave to David. Because the nations certainly can't do it. Their track record is appalling before this and after this and everywhere in between. At no time in Israel's history did they ever keep the covenant. Not ever. So what they desperately need is someone to come and keep the covenant on their behalf. Someone who can keep the covenant. And that, of course, is only God. Because it is God's covenant. And it takes God to keep God's covenant. No human being can do that. And so this is all pointing the way to this eternal, everlasting king that has been promised is also going to be the one who's going to represent Israel and be the true Israel, who's going to do what Israel were meant to do but never ever did. And so they come together. This conditionality and this unconditionality are resolved in Christ. The perfect man king.
It's like grace on top of grace.
Yes. Yeah.
Grace allowing grace to be bestowed.
That's right. Yeah. I love those words of that hymn, Amazing Grace. It was grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace will lead me home.
Yes.
Amazing that grace should teach you to be scared.
Yes.
God's great kindness to you should make you scared to offend him. You should really be praying, Lord, help me not blow it today. I don't want to disappoint you. Not because we will suddenly lose our salvation or something. But I fear what I might do today. It would drag your name through the mud. Help me not to do that today. And we'll talk about tomorrow, but every day is a dangerous day for a Christian because of grace that's been shown to us.
Just trying to get this right in my own mind. Unconditional, conditional. So the unconditional promise that was given to David was sort of eternal covenant that was going to be fulfilled by Christ.
Yeah.
Whereas the conditional promise given to Solomon was essentially for the Jewish nation.
Yeah, my people who are called by my name. Yeah, that's right. So God says to Solomon, if you or your people sin, the deal is off. I'm going to destroy this temple. And people will walk by and be appalled at this heap of ruins. And of course, that's exactly what he does. And actually, that's exactly what happens. The temple is reduced to a heap of stones. It is completely and utterly destroyed. That glorious temple was razed to the ground. Rebuilt as a miserable shack. That was razed to the ground. Rebuilt as Herod's temple, and that's been razed to the ground. Because of the conditionality that can't be kept by human beings. God's not been unreasonable here. There's no reason why they shouldn't have been able to keep the covenants had they not sinned in the garden. It all comes back to that. You've chosen your master, you see. And your master is sin, and you will answer to your master. And now Jesus comes along and offers to be a new master to us that we can answer to. And he's defeated the old master for us.
And the unconditional covenant, or was it unconditional, that was given to Abraham? Is that the same promise that was given to David?
Yeah, it's just developed further. That's right. So through you, all nations will be blessed. Yeah. In other words, I'm going to reverse the curse through you. And nations can be blessed instead of cursed through you.
You're talking about Christ.
Through a seed of Abraham. It's interesting. Galatians picks this up, but in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, he will bruise your heel, but the seed of the woman will crush his head. That great promise. Galatians makes a big thing of that. The fact that it wasn't plural, it's singular. A seed of the woman, a particular seed, a particular descendant, offspring of the woman is going to crush Satan's head. And then when you get to Genesis chapter 12, 9 chapters later, a seed of Abraham, a particular descendant, offspring of Abraham, through a particular offspring, God will bring blessing to the world. And Galatians makes a big deal of that, of course. That seed is Christ. Spoken of right back from Genesis chapter 3. So yeah, we now discover that the seed who is going to crush Satan is the seed who's going to rule eternally from God's throne over God's kingdom forever and ever. And that seed is actually Jesus. And he is not only going to rule and crush God's enemy, he's going to do that by becoming an enemy of God. Or be at least being treated as though he were an enemy of God, by having God's wrath and fury poured out on him. That's how he's going to crush Satan, is by submitting to Satan. How has he crushed death? By submitting to death, by going through it. That's the irony, the paradox of the gospel. When he looks his weakest, he is his strongest. I was saying to my Bible study this morning, talking about the centurion at the cross. So when he saw how Jesus died, he said, surely this is the Son of God. And the centurion, Son of God, that's the title that the emperor carried. For his whole life, the centurion has been worshipping the emperor as the Son of God. The title was stamped on the back of every Roman coin. You worshipped, you made sacrifices to your emperor. He is the Son of God, and you worshipped him. And now he's saying, surely the emperor isn't the Son of God. Surely this man is the Son of God. He's just changed gods. He's become a Christian. He's saying, I'm no longer going to worship a false Son of God. I'm going to worship this man. And who is this man? A dead Jew hanging on a cross. He waits till Jesus dies, and then he says, this is God. Amazing. And so in the left-hand corner in the red trunks, You've got Julius Caesar in all his splendor, crown, armies, gold, and on the left corner, in the red blue trunks, whatever, you've got a dead Jew, carpenter, illegitimate child, born of a peasant girl, under very suspicious circumstances from Nazareth, of all places. Who are you going to worship as king? And the centurion says, I choose Jesus. It's completely against all logic and against all human wisdom that you would choose the weakest thing to worship as God, and not the most powerful, impressive thing. And the centurion makes the right choice. He says, I'm with this guy. This dead guy, the guy I've just killed, actually. So it's astonishing.
So was the thief. So there was two of them.
Yeah, two of them. A couple Christians on them as Jesus is dying on the cross. Yeah, that's right. They see through the weakness to see what's behind it. There's this divine strength. And he's defeating death by dying. Amazing. Okay. So, 2 Chronicles 10. How many of the time?
Coffee.
Nearly time. 2 Chronicles 10, through to the end, that whole section tells us about the rest of the kings of Judah. So we had a whole bunch of chapters about David in 1 Chronicles, 10 chapters about Solomon, 9 chapters about Solomon in 2 Chronicles, and then he just packs the rest of the book full of the other kings of Judah. But this massive, what's the word? Disproportionate amount of time to given to only 2 of those kings. There were dozens of kings of Judah, but he gives most of his work to just 2 of them. All his focus is on 2 kings of Judah. We're told how the kingdom splits in these chapters, and we're told that it was because of Rehoboam's reluctance to rule, as he had been advised to rule by his advisors. Do you remember? He's told to lighten the load, but he says that actually I'm going to assert myself. I'm going to assert myself and get these people to respect me like that. But you don't earn respect by asserting yourself, do you? But amazingly, if you had to tell the story of David, what stories would you include in there?
David Goliath.
Goliath? Not there.
Killing of 10,000, 100,000. Remember there was a song about it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And running away from his son.
Yeah, running away from his son. Bathsheba?
Yes, that's right.
Sheba.
Not there.
And the
Not there.
anointing Samuel.
Yeah, not there. And if you had to tell the story of Solomon,
And
building the temple, actually,
Wisdom.
that's given this much time, and David has been he's given all the credit for the temple. What else is famous about Solomon? His wisdom.
His
Yeah.
wealth.
His wealth. Another,
His
his wives.
wives.
Not mentioned. Not mentioned. We don't get a mention of Solomon's wives and the idolatry that he fell into because of his wives. Why? Why? Do you notice what's happening here?
He's leaving out the bad.
Exactly. There's no negatives. There's no negatives about David and Solomon. He leaves out all the bad stuff. There's no Bathsheba. There's no Saul quivering in his tent being a complete and utter sissy and baby. There's nothing about Solomon being led astray by foreign women. It's just like he just shoves that all over the carpet. All the bad stuff you can go and read about. It's all in Kings. And all the stuff, the good stuff that Kings leaves out, he brings in. And he paints this incredible picture of David and Solomon that you won't find anywhere else in the Bible. It's not made up stories, but he's just wanting to focus you on one thing: the glory of these 2 predecessors of the ultimate king, and how these 2 are a type of what that king will be. If you want to get the anti-type of what that king Jesus will be, go and read Kings. All the skeletons are there, all the rubbish is there about what Jesus will not be like. But he wants to give us a picture of what God's Messiah will be like. So he just scraps anything that is even hints of sin. And these 2 come out with flying colors, and actually they were rascals. They really were. Amazing. When you read 1 Kings, you find that actually Solomon's many wives were the cause of the kingdom splitting. North and south. Yeah, his wives are not even mentioned. here it seems, we're told in 2 Chronicles that the kingdom split because of political disagreements. Amazing. It's a completely, talk about spin doctor, there's completely different spin on the whole thing. We don't have time to go through all the kings because Jonathan wants coffee. But besides that, there's a pattern, a bit like Judges. You don't read the whole book of Judges. You just read the first cycle and you multiply it by 12 because it's over and over again. And here again, there's this pattern that we can look out for as you do read through all the kings from now on. The king starts off well. He ends badly because of idolatry, and it results in judgment finally coming on Israel. And every king is just told in the same way. Starts out well, ends badly, and God's judgment is the result. However, we're told that there's an exception to that rule. Halfway through, we get to the king Hezekiah, and suddenly a huge amount of time is dedicated to King Hezekiah. Twice as much time is given to King Hezekiah as is given to King Hezekiah in 2 Kings. When you compare the story of Hezekiah in 2 Kings versus here, why do you think he focuses so much and gives so much attention to King Hezekiah? What do you know about King Hezekiah?
He was a better king.
Yeah, there we go. Goes with the bronze thing. If there's a good king, he nails it. If there's anything good that a king did, gives it 5 chapters, you know. And yeah, in the midst of bad king, when he gets to a good king, man, he goes crazy. And he gives you every good thing you can possibly think of that King Hezekiah ever did, painting this incredible picture of the kings of Israel. And finally, we're told about the exile. You know, all these kings finally result in Jehoiachim and Jehoiakim, other way around, Jehoiakim and then Jehoiachin, and then Nebuchadnezzar taking them all off as prisoners of war. We're told about the faithful remnants, Daniel and his friends, and we're told about the return. And we're told about the destruction of Jerusalem incredibly briefly. Just a mention. Oh, by the way, Jerusalem got flattened. Now moving on. It's a lowlight, and he's not interested in lowlights. This is the Oprah Winfrey. It's all good. It's all going to be wonderful, you know. It's incredible. And instead of focusing on the destruction of Jerusalem, which was a horrific siege, and shocking condition that people had to live for, he focuses rather on the wonderful sovereignty of God. Isn't God wonderful how he brought Nebuchadnezzar along just at the right time, and how God can use anyone, even Nebuchadnezzar, even though people didn't listen to God. But God is wonderful. Isn't it wonderful serving God? Just the focus is all good. We read about the sin in chapter 36. We're right at the end now. So the sin is told to us in 36 from verse 5. Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he became king. He reigned in Jerusalem for 11 years. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord his God. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, attacked him and bound him with bronze shackles to take him off to Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar also took to Babylon articles from the temple of the Lord, put them in his temple, and the other events of Jehoiakim's reign, and the detestable things he did, and the things that were found against him are written, if you want to read them, in the book of the Kings of Israel. But moving on quickly, Jehoiakim took over. This guy just skips as fast as he can without being deceitful. Just skips over anything bad at all. And we're told that Nebuchadnezzar's judgment then, is coming, is the judgment of God, that God's sovereign hand is at work. And finally, the book ends with verses 22 and 23 about the return, which we've already read. In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah, the Lord moved the heart of Cyrus. Again, reminding you about God's faithfulness to his word. To fulfill God's word, when he spoke a promise to Jeremiah, well, God fulfilled it by moving the heart of this pagan king. Encouraging people to trust the promises God has made. Okay. So, what are these books about? Let's finish off with this. What are these books all about? Notice what the author is emphasizing. As we've already, I think, started to see very, very plainly, he expects a lot of the reader. He expects you to have read 1 and 2 Samuel and 1 and 2 Kings. because he assumes you know the history of Israel, and so he doesn't want to dig up every bit of dirt. He's kind of saying, you know about that, I'm not going to repeat it again. But here's some stuff you don't know. And in the stuff that he does underline are the genealogies, where he focuses again and again and again on the kings of the southern kingdom and the line of Judah, proving that this line is still in existence all the way from Adam right down to his present day. His focus is also on the temple. The fact, and he brings it very clearly, that David was the architect. He did everything except mix cement, you know. He left that to his son, but he did everything else. He is really to be given all the glory for the temple, according to the chronicler. And his great emphasis is that it works wonderfully. This temple is fantastic. It functions properly. All the right people are doing the right things. And of course, the line of Judah. His emphasis is on David's good rule, his victory over all his enemies, how he was the one who led Israel into peace. Also, Solomon's reign is painted in glowing terms, painted as the wise king. So you've got David as the military king, architect of the temple, and you've got David, this wise king who rules over God's people from the temple. His emphasis is on how good these two kings were. Whereas King highlights the negatives, the book of Kings. Chronicles highlights the positives. It doesn't ignore the sin, but it's in its fine print. You can read about the sins, they're very small, and he looks over it very, very quickly. When was Kings written compared to Chronicles being written? And who was Kings written for compared to who was Chronicles written for?
Kings was obviously written a lot earlier.
Yeah, a lot earlier. The readers of Kings were the exiles. The readers of Chronicles were the post-exiles. In other words, what sort of questions are the exiles asking?
Why were we punished?
Why are we in Babylon? Why is God so mean? How horrible is he? He's got us living here in a foreign land, and he made all these promises. You can't trust him. He's breaking all his promises. And so 1 and 2 Kings is written and say, no. Let's just get the story straight. Just remember what got you here. It's your fault you're here. It's a bit like people in hell saying, God's so unfair, and someone saying, no, he's not. You chose to be here. Just remember, let's go through your sins, let's dig out the book. And that's what Kings does. It highlights all the negatives to show the people it's their fault. It's not God's fault. He's not mean. He's not unfaithful. But the people in the Chronicles, they are not asking those questions. Why is this happening to us? Why are we, God is so mean. They're asking the question, why is this happening to us? Why are we sitting here with no king, under foreign power? Is there any point in carrying on as a Jew? He's saying, yes, there is. There's a great future. There's a great king coming. Look how wonderful David and Solomon were. Well, the king who's coming is even better than that. Man, you're going to miss out if you give up now. It's just hang in there for a few more days. It's around the corner. A couple more 100 years. You can do it. You can do it. Just hang in there. It's going to be well worth it. Can you see the different perspectives? And the different roles that these two, it's the same history, just being told for very, very different purposes. The one to rebuke a people, and the other to encourage a people, to keep going. And this is to rebuke the people of any thoughts that God's at fault. So, in order to do that, secondly, he leaves out anything that smells of the kings of Israel being sinful. The handover from Saul to David, and from David to Solomon is completely omitted. Do you remember why? Because it was sin that led to Saul being killed. And it was sin that led to David losing the throne. It doesn't even talk about the handover at all. Okay? This Saul and David and Solomon painted in wonderful colors. No David and Bathsheba. No sins of David's sons either. They were a bunch of rascals. Remember, they tried to kill David. Not mentioned. Not mentioned. In fact, he omits the northern kingdom completely. It's like it never existed, because it's that cousin that no one wants to talk about, that uncle that you don't invite to the wedding. It's just going to bring the family's name into shame, and so we'd rather just pretend he doesn't exist. Okay? And that's what he does with 10 tribes. He just doesn't talk about it, because they've got nothing good to bring to the party. Nothing. And so we just rather pretend that it exists. It's amazing. If you had to have written, and he does mention very, very, very briefly a few kings of the Northern Kingdom. If you had to write about the Northern Kingdom and God's dealings with the Northern Kingdom, which two prophets would you spend lots of time talking about? Elijah and Elisha. Remember, they were sent to rebuke, what was her name, Jezebel and her husband. And the whole story of Elijah and Elisha is massive in the Old Testament. Well, it's massive in Kings. It's not mentioned. Elijah and Elisha is like they don't exist. Because why? They had to rebuke the sins of kings. Well, according to the Chronicler, Israel's kings never sinned. So why bring in Elijah and Elisha? That will just, that will tarnish the picture of it. Amazing. I mean, Elijah and Elisha, Jesus meets Elijah, Mount of Transfiguration. He's a huge Old Testament prophet. He doesn't exist here. It's incredible. And so the main themes, well, the survival of the kingdom, the fact that God has preserved this kingdom. The Northern Kingdom didn't survive, so he just doesn't mention that at all. He wants us to know that actually the Southern Kingdom isn't going to just survive, the Southern Kingdom. It's going to thrive. It's going to become a glorious kingdom one day. You just wait and see, he says. Why? Because it's going to be ruled by the most glorious king that you ever see, even better than what I can say about David and Saul. And the kingdom the temple that's coming, well, wait till we see that. That's going to be an amazing temple. And of course, he's talking about a person and not a building when he talks about that. Finally, its application to its readers, well, it was written after the pathetic return from exile. A few stragglers come back, 42,000, remember they're numbered for us, they come back. It's miserable, the return. Most people decided not to come back. They weren't bothered, couldn't be bothered to come back. 42,000 come back, and they don't do very well. Remember, they build their own wooden panelled houses instead of the temple of the Lord. They get involved in foreign women. They desecrate the Sabbath. They turn the temple into a marketplace like in Jesus' day. Remember, it was a huge anticlimax. And this author is writing to those people. I'm saying, actually, hang in there. The royal line is still intact. The king is on the way. There is hope. God's promises, all on track, all on track. It's all going to happen. Just hang in there. You've just got to wait. You've just got to wait. He's reminding the people that God has promised a glorious kingdom, a perfect kingdom ruled by the perfect king. And so what must we do? 400 years is a long time to keep going without God saying anything. Go with what he's already said. 2,000 years of going a long time without God saying anything new. Go with what he's already said. He's given us his full and final word. Go with what God has said. You don't have to have a new word every day when he's already spoken everything he wants to say. And as for these last 400 years, God's got nothing new to say. He's saying, just wait. Just hang in there. I've got a few things to sort out. For instance, I need Alexander the Great to come first and convert the world to speaking Greek so I can at least get the New Testament written in a language that everyone can understand. God's saying, everything's ready for the Messiah to come. You're just going to wait 400 years quickly, and then you'll come. So just hang there. Don't change anything. Don't do anything different. Keep worshipping me. And it's like that for us. 2,000 years, just hang in there. Got a few things to quickly sort out. But it's all ready for Jesus to come back. He can come back any time, but I'm going to just keep going for a little while longer. A few more Eskimos, a few more Aborigines, a few more, Sydney dwellers, and to have the gospel to be saved, come into the kingdom, and then the Messiah's coming. You'll see glorious kingdom, glorious temple, glorious king. Don't give up now. You'd be missing so much if you gave up now. There we go.
Wow.
Awesome book, eh? 1 and 2 Chronicles. Awesome books.
That's incredible. You skipped Chronicles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those genealogies just kill me.
Yeah.
Can I just ask a question about Solomon?
Yeah.
So when he asks for wisdom, about 3 verses or 4 verses before that, he's joining one of his wives worshipping. They're at an Ashtoreth, or they're like worshipping, and then literally a chapter later, he's got God giving him all wisdom because that's what he's asked for. So
that's grace, isn't it? Grace is getting what you don't deserve. Grace is better than mercy. Grace is getting what you don't deserve. So Solomon, and that is the same. I mean, 1 minute, I mean, the lead up to Bathsheba, it's glory days. I mean, he is just conquering and conquering and conquering. There's no one who can even raise a finger against David. And next thing he's in bed with Bathsheba, you know. And what does God do? Well, just keeps on giving him victory, you know. And yeah, it's still through you, I'm going to bring my son into the world. Yeah, there's going to be consequences. There will be consequences. For David, he lost the throne. For Solomon, you know, this kingdom split. But God just gives grace upon grace upon grace to, I mean, these are just typical human beings. Yeah.
He didn't seem wise, though. I mean, his actions wouldn't suggest that he acted wisely in a lot of cases. So, yeah.
Wisdom sort of faded.
Faded. You know, what is wisdom and foolishness in the Bible? It's a bit different to the way we define wisdom and foolishness. So what is a fool according to the Bible?
Someone who doesn't
Yeah, a fool says in his heart there is no God. So according to the Bible, God's view of a fool is someone who doesn't acknowledge him. So what would the definition, God's definition of a wise person be? Someone who does acknowledge God. And so if Solomon does that, he's a wise man.
But he had false gods and wives, and he followed his wives' gods. And
You wonder if he was even died a Christian. I mean, you wonder if he was sent to heaven one day. But you know, he started out anyway. By the time that was written that he was wise, he was a follower of God. He was a very devout follower of God. He acknowledged God. He prayed for wisdom. He said, "I can't manage this job by myself." He was doing the right things, saying the right stuff, being wise, basically, calling God on God for help, which is what a wise man does. Whereas the fool says, "I can do this myself."
yeah.
Right, Titan.
Yeah.
Attendance nonsense. We get Smartie biscuits. Right. Which anyone watching online will miss out on. Just before we get going, a couple of housekeeping things. You would have noticed we've extended this term to tonight and next week. So it's a longer term and have a shorter term next term. And the reason for that is that I need an operation done in July, which is going to put me on my back for a few weeks. And so the dates have been rescheduled by Shane, so check your calendars. And he's put the new dates in there. But by the time we get to the fourth term, we'll be back on track again. So we're having a longer term now. And then just a reminder for the banking details, if you can give a donation towards it, the banking details are on the website as well, which will just help. Right, we're looking at step 7. It's been a long time since we did one of these sessions, actually, because we've done Psalms, which was long, and a couple of others. So, studying the Bible. Remember, we've been working out from studying the words to the sentences to the sections, and now finally, now must study the Bible. And we must ask some questions when we come to a particular passage. We've just been chatting in the kitchen about the prayer of Jabez. You know, what would be the right way and the wrong way to interpret the prayer of Jabez? Well, the wrong way is to take the words, you know, take a pair of scissors, cut the words out of your Bible, stick them on the wall, and say it every morning, like Bruce Wilkinson says you should do. The right way to do it is to think about context. Who wrote it? Who was it written to? Why, what was it written for? What did it mean for those people? How was it fulfilled in Christ? And then, does it have anything whatsoever to say to me? The answer might be yes, and the answer might be no. But you may be sure, whatever the message of the prayer of Jabez is, it was fulfilled in Christ, first and foremost. And it is about Jesus and about his territory being extended and his kingdom. You know, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. As Christ's gospel gets preached, so Christ's kingdom grows. And so we need to ask some questions about a passage, especially in the Old Testament passages. Things like, when did these events take place? Where did they take place? Are we in Israel? Are we in Babylon? Are we up with Jonah, up in Nineveh, in the middle of Assyria? Where are we when this is busy being written? Is it pre-exile, during exile, post-exile? All of that is really, really important to understanding what on earth the passage means. What covenants have been given by God so far? Are we before or after Moses' covenant? Are we before or after David's covenant? You know, at what stage of salvation history are we in as we read this? And where does this book and this passage fit on the timeline of the Bible? And now you know this diagram very well by now. This is the timeline of Israel and where the various kings and prophets and books of the Bible fit in. And you've got this in your notes. It's hugely, I found it massively helpful over the years, especially in the Old Testament, especially as you come to an Old Testament passage. Genesis 19. Go and read, where are you in the timeline? That's quite easy, it's right at the beginning. But it really makes a very big difference to know exactly what's going on around the passage that you're busy reading. What would the first readers have made of these words? When the first readers read these words, how would they have understood those words? Because the words were written for them, first and foremost, before us, miles before us. Are they in a hopeless situation? Are they in a hopeful situation where they should actually feel hopeless? The prophets sometimes say, you guys are in the temple every day, sacrificing, singing songs, it's wonderful, but you know what? God left the room long ago. You're singing to the walls. He's not here. He's not hearing what you're saying. Why? Because your heart is no heart. I don't desire sacrifices. Where do you get that idea from? That will make me happy. In fact, things like sacrifices in the Old Testament and obedience to the Ten Commandments or whatever in the New Testament is an excuse not to love God. Instead of loving Jesus, I think I'll go to church. Instead of loving Jesus, I think I'll be faithful to my wife and I'll tithe. So obedience becomes the opposite of love, and sacrifice becomes the opposite of love. So you can do this to get God off your back. Instead of, I love God, I give my heart to Him. I serve Him with everything I've got, which is what He wants. So you've got to ask yourself, that was the historical context. What about the theological context? As we read from within the Bible, the passage that you're looking at, where is it quoted elsewhere in the Bible? What is it teaching you about God? Theological. Theological? Fear God. Okay, what is it? The study of God. What are you learning about God? What is it teaching you about God? Not about yourself. What is it teaching you about God? What is God like? If you didn't have this passage, what would you be missing about God? It's building up the character of God in our minds. So, Sodom and Gomorrah we were talking about earlier with Biden. Where else is Sodom and Gomorrah mentioned in the Bible? It is.
2 Peter, where was it? You were talking about it on the
Oh, really, as well. I was talking about Jesus mentioning it, remember? And he says to you, as a Capernaum, if the signs that have been performed among you were performed in Sodom and Gomorrah, they would have repented.
Yes.
But you refuse, and so it'll be worse for you than for Sodom and Gomorrah. Suddenly it sheds a light on Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah is a curtain raiser. It's an air raid siren going off. Like, be careful, this is what happens to people when they reject God. But it's not the final judgment. The final judgment is coming. And Jesus spoke those words, not to Samaritans or Pharisees, to Philistines. He's spoken to Pharisees, devout Jews, who had given up everything to follow the God of the Old Testament. And he says, actually, you're worse than the inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah. Because you don't acknowledge me. So a great example is Isaiah 61. We've got a couple of fun examples that we're going to look at with the time we've got. Isaiah chapter 61. Remember, we're looking at where is this quoted elsewhere. So verses 1 and 2, the Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives, to release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn. Now that's quoted in the New Testament. Remember, Jesus quotes that of himself in Luke chapter 4. So we go to Luke chapter 4 to see what light it sheds on Isaiah chapter 61. So Luke chapter 4 verse 16. He went to Nazareth where he had been brought up, And on the Sabbath day he went into the synagogue, as was his custom. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. Unrolling it, he found the place where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Then he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, sat down. The eyes of everyone were on him. He began by saying to them, "Today the scripture is fulfilled in your hearing."
Yeah.
The shortest sermon ever preached.
Yeah, yeah.
It's all about me. And me sitting here fulfills that.
Yeah.
Now, what are the differences between what Isaiah wrote and what Jesus says? Did you pick up something that Jesus does, that only Jesus could do?
Personalize it.
Yeah, he does that. He says, "It's not me. This is fulfilled." But when he quotes it, he leaves something out. He just conveniently skips over something. So in chapter 61, sorry? Yeah, release, he talks about, no? I've come to do all this to proclaim, to bind up, to proclaim freedom, to release, and to comfort those who mourn. He leaves out to proclaim the day of the vengeance of our God. He just doesn't mention that. Did he forget? Does he not know his Old Testament? He leaves out the rest of that sentence. He just cuts it short. And he says, "Today this has been fulfilled." So what he's saying, well, what is he saying? He needs to see it.
The vengeance of our God is not come yet.
It's not come yet. So he's saying, yeah. So he's saying, today, this part has been fulfilled in your hearing. The point up to there has been fulfilled. And by leaving out the day of the vengeance of God, what's he saying? It's still coming. Don't think that actually I've come to bring the vengeance of God. I've not come to bring judgment. I've come to be judged. I've come to secure freedom through being judged. And yes, the day of God's vengeance is going to fall on me now in my coming, but actually, you guys need to wait, I don't know, 2,000 years and counting for the rest of this verse to be finished, to be fulfilled. And he splits that verse right down the middle, which of course was a very, very striking thing to do for a Jew, because the Jews believed in one coming. At the end of time, the Messiah would come and wrap things up. And as we hear, what do we see? Two comings. Yeah? And actually, when you go back to the Old Testament and read it again, it's there. The two comings are there, but actually it's quite obscure if you're an Old Testament Jew, which is what the hearers were. They were still Old Testament Jews that Jesus was talking to. They would have found it very difficult to see two comings of the Christ. As John the Baptist did, remember, he's in jail, he sends his disciples to Jesus, says, "I don't see you bringing any vengeance. I don't see you judging any Romans. Are you the one, or should we be waiting for another Christ, or what's going on?" And Jesus goes and quotes this. He's saying, actually, go and tell John, the blind are seeing, the deaf are walking, hearing, the lame are walking. You just got your timing wrong. You need to take that final coming and stretch it like a piece of chewing gum over 2,000 years, because the coming has begun, but actually it's not all in one event in Jerusalem. It's spanning thousands of years until the second coming. So we're in these last days, which is actually the last day stretched out over 2,000 years, when God will come to save his people and judge his enemies. Jesus says those are two different events, separated by history. And he leaves out, he says, for now I've come to do the first bit. But wait, when I come to do the second bit, that will be the vengeance of God. I'm coming to do the second bit as well, but not yet. That's not why I've come the first time. This time has not been to bring judgment on God's enemies. It's to save God's enemies. Amazing, eh?
Yeah.
Exodus chapter 12 versus John chapter 19. So Exodus chapter 12. What do you expect to find in Exodus chapter 12? Just off the top of your head. Something to do with what?
The exile.
The exile.
I mean, the
The Passover, that's right. So the plagues are all around there.
Yeah.
Exodus, they're in Egypt. They're in Egypt. In Exodus chapter 12, and it's the Passover. So Exodus chapter 12, verse 46. The instructions for the eating of the Passover lamb: it must be eaten inside the house. Take none of the meat outside the house. Do not break any of the bones. Now we flip over to John chapter 19, and John picks that up. And so he gives us the Christian interpretation of that. So we must never teach or read the Bible as though we're Jews without the Christian interpretation. John, in verse 31, says, "Now it was the day of the preparation, and the next day was to be the special Sabbath. Because the Jewish leaders did not want the bodies left on the crosses during the Sabbath, they asked Pilate to have the legs broken and the bodies taken down." So we're talking about the crucifixion here. "The soldiers therefore came and broke the legs of the first man who had been crucified with Jesus, and then the legs of those of the other. But when they came to Jesus, they found that he was already dead. They did not break his legs. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced Jesus' side with a spear, bringing a sudden flow of blood and water. The man who saw this has given testimony, and his testimony is true. He knows that he tells the truth, and he testifies so that you may also believe. These things have happened so that the scripture could be fulfilled: not one of his bones will be broken. And as another scripture says, they will look on the one they've pierced. So it picks up this little fact from the Passover instructions that none of his bones are to be broken. And he says that scripture was fulfilled on that day because Jesus died before they could come and break his legs in order to kill him. What is John saying about Jesus? He is the ultimate Passover lamb. All the Passover lambs, every year Passover lambs, they were not the Passover lamb. They were pictures of a Passover lamb. A Passover lamb that would come and not have any of its bones broken, and would be sacrificed for the sins of the world. And so Jesus dies at the time of preparation. As they are busy preparing the Passover lambs for slaughter, for sacrifice, and they're cutting throats. It was a full-time job. 100,000 pilgrims coming into Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover, and they just cut throats all day. As they're doing that, Jesus is hanging on the cross while they're cutting throats and slaughtering the sheep. He is the Passover lamb. Mark chapter 12 versus Isaiah chapter 5. Isaiah chapter 5 is it's a very, very sad passage. I will sing, says God, I will sing for the one I love, a song about his vineyard. My loved one had a vineyard on a fertile hillside. He dug it up and cleared it of stones and planted it with the choicest vines. He built a watchtower in it and cut out a winepress as well. Then he looked for a crop of good grapes, but it yielded only bad fruit. Now you dwellers in Israel and people of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more could have been done for my vineyard than I have done for it? When I looked for good grapes, why did it yield only bad? Now I will tell you what I'm going to do with my vineyard. I will take away its hedge, and it will be destroyed. I'll break down its wall, and it will be trampled. I'll make it a wasteland. Neither prune nor cultivate it, and briars and thorns will grow there. I will command the clouds not to rain on it. The vineyard of the Lord Almighty is the nation of Israel, and the people of Judah are the vines he delighted in. And he looked for justice, but saw bloodshed. For righteousness, but he heard cries of distress. Woe to you! And so he goes on. Then we get across to Mark chapter 12. And Jesus, guess what he's going to talk about? A vineyard. Jesus began to speak to them in parables. A man planted a vineyard. He put a wall around it. He dug a pit for the winepress and built a watchtower. What's he talking about? Okay. He rented the vineyard to some farmers and moved to another place. At harvest time, he sent a servant to the tenants to collect from them some of the fruit of the vineyard. But they seized him and beat him and sent him away empty-handed. He sent another servant, they struck him on the head, treated him shamefully. He sent another, and that one they killed. He sent many others, some they beat, some they killed. He had one left to send, the son whom he loved. He sent him last of all, saying, they will respect my son. But the tenants said to one another, this is the heir, come, let's kill him, and the inheritance will be ours. So they took him and killed him and threw him out of the vineyard. What then will the owner of the vineyard do? He will come and kill those tenants and give the vineyard to others. Haven't you read the passage of scripture? The stone the builders have rejected has become the cornerstone. Verse 12, then the chief priests, the teacher of the law, and the elders looked for a way to arrest him because they knew he had spoken the parable against them. But they were afraid of the crowd. He's saying, well, what is he saying to these chief priests, teachers of the law, Pharisees?
You are those people that
You're no better than your fathers. And when was Isaiah speaking? According to our little diagram here. Okay, there.
745 to 620 BC.
Yeah, so he's saying to them, to remember to those people, you are the vineyard. What will the owner do? He will break down his hedge. You will be destroyed. And what happened after that? This happened.
Yes.
Because of their actions, this happened. And Jesus is saying to the Pharisees, teacher of the law, you are just like that. So guess what's going to happen? This is going to happen to you. You're no better than your forefathers. You're doing exactly what your forefathers did. And guess what? Destruction is going to come on you. And then, of course, he tells the parable of the fig tree. When he goes to look for good fruit and he finds nothing. They come back in the morning, what's happened to the tree? Stone dead. And he's saying, look, you are the tree, Israel. You're the tree. I'm done with you. I'm finished with you. Stone dead. Stone dead. From the roots up, stone dead. He curses the fig tree. Produced nothing but bloodshed and eventually killed them. They killed them. Well, we can keep going all night, can't we? Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me? And Jesus utters those words on the cross. And you're going to read the rest of Psalm 22. And it's describing exactly 1,000 years before they invented crucifixion. It's describing crucifixion. Even to the detail of he is dying of thirst and his tongue is sticking to the roof of his mouth and he asks for something to drink and they give him vinegar. You're going to read Psalm 22, you know. My tongue is stuck to the roof, my mouth is as dry as a potsherd. It's describing he the great dividing his garments through lots. It's an absolute description. 1,000 years David lived before Jesus. 1,000 years before Jesus died like it, and 1,000 years before they even invented crucifixion. It's been described. And David's experience as God's chosen king is actually the experience of God's chosen king. Literally becomes the experience of God's chosen king. What he feels he's going through is what Jesus actually goes through on the cross. And you can just go through it over and over. And it's really, really good to pick up New Testament references and allusions. Wherever you see a little quote, you know, and a little footnote, read, I'm looking at where Mark chapter 12, go and read Exodus chapter 3, verse 6. Go and read it. If you're going to be teaching the passage, you have to go and read it. You know, if you're just reading through the Bible, you don't have to spend hours cross-referencing. Just read the Bible, God's word to you. But if you've been given the job of teaching the Bible, man, you've got to get this right. You know, you've got to get it right. You've got to teach Christ from all the scriptures. Last quick one, we won't go to all the references, but when, you know, Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane says, take this cup from me. If there's any way, take this cup. Now you go and read all the references in the Old Testament to the cup of God's wrath and the cup of God's fury. It's amazing. Psalm 75, the cup filled with judgment given to the wicked to drink. Isaiah 51, Jerusalem is given the cup of God's judgment to drink. Jeremiah 25, Lamentations chapter 4, this cup of judgment is going to go to the nations and they're going to be forced to drink. Ezekiel 23, Judah will be forced to drink the cup like her sister Israel had to. Habakkuk chapter 2, Judah is going to drink the cup of judgment. And so when you come across a little comment, you know, Jesus said, take this cup from me, don't think, oh, that's sweet. He's got masses of Old Testament behind him when he says, take this cup. And in Isaiah, God says, Judah, you will drink the cup down to the very dregs. And that's what Jesus had to do. Drank the cup down to its very dregs. The cup of God's wrath, he had to drink. So that we don't have to. Because you have to. Someone has to. Either you or someone else. Get them to do it for you. All right, next week we look at the 3 mountains. Look forward to that. help us understand Old Testament passages better. 3 mountains.
Job.
Yeah, we do Job in the first session. The 3 mountains in the second session.
Shame.
And
Is reading ahead. Girls. Well, Father, thank you for your word, which is just so rich and reveals you so clearly to us, and reveals your wonderful grace and mercy to us. And we can look forward, like those post-exiles, to this day of a glorious kingdom ruled by a glorious King, if only we will keep faithful to him. So, Lord, won't you help us to do that? Won't you give us a faith every day to keep trusting in Christ and not in ourselves? And we pray this in his name. Amen.